It's time you know the truth.
Okay, so last week we went over you already know Hebrew, lesson 5. And so we went through and we showed some things with numerical value and some other interesting things. You can go back and watch it. One of the things that came up in discussion afterwards, which was shouldn't have gum in my mouth, sorry, was the style that we're going to learn. And so I was sharing with the young lady that came down from out of town that when you learn anything, you have to learn it like a child. And so going back to learn like a child is difficult as adults because we want to forget what it was like to be a child altogether. And so as a teacher in this setting, one of the things that a teacher does or a parent does or anybody does is I am only here to get you interested enough to do what you already did as a child, which was teach yourself everything. Children, from the time they're pretty much 0 until they pretty much get to school, have this insatiable desire to learn, right? So from the time a baby gets here, they begin mimicking facial expressions. You smile, and then they're trying to smile, right? You talk, they babble. You walk, they want to walk. So the job of the teacher from a Hebraic standpoint is to get you interested enough for you to teach yourself. Does that make sense? So with the language, when we're going over this stuff and when I'm showing you this stuff, you're not going to come here ever and then walk out of here and be like, oh man, I know Hebrew now. Because unlike how most people are used to learning in church, you can't come once a week and then think you're going to learn the material. If any of you have been to college, you can't go once a week, never open your textbook during the week, and then show back up and expect the teacher to teach you everything. One of the things used to happen in school all the time, and I used to say it, so I'm guilty of this as well. People go, this teacher don't teach the book, right? And it would like make you mad. It's not his job to teach you the book. It's his job to make you interested enough to go home and read the book. So everybody gets upset because they don't want to read the book all week long, and then they want the teacher to come to class and then teach them what's in the book. No, your job is to read the book, and then when the teacher gets there, they're supposed to interest you enough to go to the next chapter, and then interest you enough to go to the next chapter, and then interest you enough to go to the next chapter. So here, I'm going to be that teacher you hate because I'm not going to teach you the book. I'm going to get you interested enough for the things that we can uncover and discover in this setting and the questions we can ask and the things that we can understand here, that when you go home, you're going to do your due diligence to open up the book and learn. Last week I gave you 3 books that would be very helpful. I have another one, and not that one, the kids book. I don't have this book because the content in it is so brown, or the stuff in here is so not Jewish because it's all the opposite. It's very white and it's very Jewish, but it is for children. This is what Jade uses. And so I would recommend, if you don't want to start using like the primer, which is, I don't think it's learn like a child friendly at all, but this is. It's going to give you 2 vowel points and 2 consonants, and it's going to give you actual words. And it's pretty cool. So it's called Time to Read Hebrew. And it's not going to teach you how to speak Hebrew. And I'm not going to teach you how to speak Hebrew because that's a thing that is acquired on your own. Verbal language, as a child, you acquired it on your own. So if you want to learn how to speak Hebrew, download some, they have Hebrew audio Bibles where you can listen to your Bible being read to you in Hebrew. If that's something you're interested in. But learning biblical Hebrew is not going to teach you how to speak modern Hebrew. Does that make sense? You'll be able to read it, but you're not going to be able to speak it. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Yep. Right? Because there are different words. So you'd have to learn verbal sentence structure. So you would be able to substitute words, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to be fluent in going to Israel and speaking Hebrew just by learning biblical Hebrew. Because there's different words you have to learn. It's just like if you learn like kids, their language acquisition comes before their ability to speak, comes before their ability to read. So just because you can read something doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be able to speak it. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm just giving you some realistic points. So today, we're going to go over a couple of things. I mentioned to you that we're going to create a vocabulary system based upon, because our purpose here is so that you can read and study your Bible for yourself. And eventually, you will be able to translate it or read it enough to get enough understanding to translate or fix the translation on things that are not translated properly. That's the overarching goal here. So when you pick up a verse and it's like, that actually should say X, Y, and Z because it'd be more Hebraic and more concrete. Me and Maury talked about this the other day. I said, it'll be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but 99.9% of the Bible translations you have were translated by Christians. Catholics, they all the same. Catholics are Christians, right? Which means that when they translate the language, they read it with a mind already with the doctrine in place. I already know what I believe, and I'm going to read it and I'm going to translate it to put forth what I already believe. Does that make sense? So let's just say, and other denominations do it. There are denominations that have like gender fluid Bibles where it say he or she, because their particular Christian denomination doesn't believe that God is a male or, you know what I mean? So they go through and they do that. That is the power of translation. So my job is to give you back the power to where you read something, even if you read it in English, right, that you'll understand, okay, what's under this means something completely different. And I can look at it and actually make a valid and distinct argument for what I'm seeing. Yes?
I think last week when you were teaching, I go and I look something up and I think I'm reading it wrong. I go
Like English way? This way?
I go this way.
Like how you would read normally? Like with,
Yeah.
okay, so yeah. Always remember with Hebrew, and that's the one thing that kind of gets, is to read it from right to left.
Okay.
Right to left, because it'd be like, that don't even sound like a word. You know, that probably happens. So what we'll do today when we go and we're going to read through and we're going to make a vocabulary. We already know these words. I told you, you already know a lot of this stuff. We're going to go through and get our vocabulary together through going through Genesis. We're going to point out words. I'm going to sit over there so you won't see me, but I'm going to click them and you'll be like, oh, okay, that's the word for this. And then I'll show you like, we'll do like Bereshit. So there's a word in the middle, Rosh, head, in, and then eat in the beginning. So we're going to go through and you're going to develop a working vocabulary. That's what kids do. If you've ever been with a kid and you read a book and you go, today we're doing Paddington, and my nephew was teaching him how to read. And it said, and then when you get to the train station, I was like, do you know what a train station is? And he was like, no. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about what a train station is. So when you get to certain words that you don't know the definition of, just like you do in English, you look them up, you add them to your memory bank, and then you're reading through Genesis, so a lot of the stuff is going to come up over and over again. That's why I picked this book, this chapter, I'm sorry. So that's where we're going to start. Grab this. I'm going to sit over there. I'll do some writing on the screen. We're going to go back over briefly the Alephbet really quickly. I'm going to show you those vowel points that I showed you months ago and those sounds that I told you are familiar to us. And then we're going to go into Genesis. We're not going to necessarily worry about the vowel points today as much as we're going to worry about having a piece of paper, going through these words, each one, and we're going to write down the definition. If it helps you, make some flashcards out of them later. But we're going to write down the definition of each of these words because they're going to repeat a lot. And it's going to help you because then you'll be familiar with them.
Not if you do the whole thing, but like when you do words, wouldn't it help us if we have the English spelling?
I'm going to give you both. So when it pops up on the screen, it'll show you the English spelling and it'll give you the English spelling and the definition. So those will pop up on the screen, and we'll go over those, and we'll be able to see them.
A lot of times when you write them in Hebrew.
Right, it's like, what does that mean? How do I say it? Yes, okay, so we'll make sure that when they come up, if they don't, I'll write it a second time. Okay, so make sure this is stable. All right. Okay, this is your Hebrew Alphabet. I said this a bunch of times before, and we'll do it again. Each letter has a picture. This chart helps because it's going to show you the if you will, the evolution, I hate to use that word, but the changing of this, how the letters look. But as you can see, when you go from early, middle, late, the name of the letter, right? The picture, you see that there's not like three different pictures for those three different, symbols. Aleph, 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 three different ways. But when you get to the word picture, it's ox head. Showing you that it doesn't change at all, streamlined. So this idea that one is Yiddish, one is this, one is that is not true. What you can also see is that the picture has a meaning. And so all that is up there. And this chart I know is on the Awakening Remnant website. It is. Right on the front page. If you go to awakeningremnant.com, you can get this chart. And so everyone here, we can go through each of them, but you guys have your Hebrew chart as well. So, want to take a vote? You want to go through them, or you want to use your Hebrew chart? Do you have? Everybody have one? Yeah. Go through them. Okay. So let's go through them. I'm going to give you a little information about the late script. So this late script is slightly different than your Aramaic script or your modern Hebrew script, but it's not very different. And so we'll see it in some other slides that we have coming up. The late script, where we get that script from, it comes during the time of Ezra, when they came out of Babylonian captivity, is where you get your modern Aramaic script. Now, the Babylonians spoke an Afro-Asiatic language, which is called Babylonian, or from Ashur, or Assyrian, which came from a root of the Sumerian people, and Ugarit, and you can go back and look at all these nations and streamline this together. So while their writing system may have looked different, they still had the same understanding or pictographical understanding as the Hebrews had. So it's not a violation that they went in and spent 70 years in captivity and came out writing different, but they didn't come out thinking different. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. The other day we were talking about the book of Enoch, which is very interesting. And the book of Enoch is written in the Ge'ez, I think it's how it's pronounced. It's G-E'-E-Z. And it's actually an Afro-Asiatic language, and it's a liturgical language of Ethiopians. So now Ethiopians now speak Amharic, but Ge'ez that they found the oldest copy of Enoch in is actually written in an Afro-Asiatic language with its root in a system similar to Hebrew. So they would have had the same root understanding and pictographical understanding as the ancient Hebrew language. Okay. So when we go through these, you see the ox head here. So Aleph is an ox head, and it represents strong power or leader. And the reason why it's an ox head, or it's a head that has horns on it, is because horns symbolize authority. The only culture that we know of in our modern minds that did that were the Vikings. Remember you see those like Vikings, and they have these big old like horns on there. They weren't doing that just because they just like horned hats. The horn symbolized something that was strong or authority. Well, that goes all the way back to the ancient Hebrew and to the ancient time of our ancestors, where the horns on a crown symbolized authority. So now when you see crowns nowadays, they have points on them, right? Right. Those points are a modern, more, if you want to say, sophisticated way to represent horns. Mm-hmm. But that's what they would have originally been. They would have taken the horns off an animal and put them onto a headrest to symbolize strength, power, leader. So you can go back and look at cultures, native cultures, aboriginal cultures, who would have these giant headresses that would be from these animals. Now when you see those, you can see a picture of that. Okay, bet. See the bed up there? It means tent floor plan, and I showed you that in another video where it has the idea of the door opening being only on one side. There's only one way in, one way out. You have to kill the person at the door in order to get in and get everything else inside. It's a protected place. And it means a family, because what would happen? A family would dwell inside of it, right? A house, right? That's our modern idea. A tent would be a better picture. And then in, meaning it's only a go-in place. It's the come out part is a little different. Also represents the womb. The idea that a baby goes in or a seed goes in, you got one way in and one way out. Once you put it in, it got to come out the same way it went in, right? Does that make sense? It does. That's the picture. That is the picture. And it's a very protected place. And it shows a separation in the tent as well. There's two sides of it. Next one, gam or gimel. And it's a foot, a camel, or a pride. So it has the idea to do with walking or gathering or pursuing something, to go after something. Okay, dalet, door. So it has the idea to move, an entrance, hanging. So we don't have, our doors open like this, but those in the room who can see those curtains over there, that would have been more of the picture of a door. And what's interesting is it shows you the might of the Aleph, or the leader of the home, because to have a door that doesn't really necessarily keep anything out, right? Because it's not like a door. So truly the Aleph, or the strong leader, is the door. This thing just acts as a representation or veil of the power you'll meet if you enter into here. This is saying don't come in. And the Aleph is like, oh, if you came in here, then you want to die. So when you look at the picture of the Holy of Holies, right, there's a picture of, there's a veil. There's nothing really keeping Yah in or anyone out except for his authority. So it has that same picture. Okay. Hey. A hey has to do with, and you can see that little pictograph on the far left, it's like a man with his arms raised. So it means to look, reveal, or breath. And the idea is to behold something, and sometimes when you behold something that's very, very awe-striking, it'll take your breath away. And the idea of, like, if you've ever done this, if you haven't, you should. If you ever go out into a field, right, and it's night and the stars are out and you just stand there, immediately you feel like this big. And it makes you go, whew, like it puts you into perspective with everything else. And so the hey, the letter has to do with the breath, or the greatness of that which is around you, which is Yah. So you're looking up to one that is greater. Okay, vav is a tent peg, and it looks like, literally like a tent peg. If you think about taking rope and tying it around, if you've ever been fishing, and you go to a fishing dock, you see that little metal thing that's on the ground where you wrap your thing around it, and it like secures the boat to the side of the, that would be a really good picture of seeing that in a modern sense. But the tent peg would have been that same way. Instead of necessarily just driving it in, you would have had to wrap it and secure it and then drive it into the ground. And so it means add, so to add something to it, to secure it, or to hook it. Zayin is a mattock. We don't really use those, but I could use the idea of like a sickle? Or something that would be used to go through and to cut down what you would eat. So it means food, cut, nourish. So we use this example a lot when we deal with Hebrew. It's the thing is not necessarily, the name is not as important as the function of it. So if a person knows something, they can explain it to you. Like if I'm very knowledgeable about, like I say, a sickle, and I'm like, oh, it's something you take, and when you see them out in the field, they cut the wheat down with it. And you're like, oh, okay, if you went out and looked at all the tools in a field or in a farmhouse, you'd be like, oh, that's the one she's talking about. So you're Zion. It also could have been a plow. So the plow, that pointed part that pulls to the ground, Zion as well. Yod or Yod is a arm and a closed or open hand. And it means to work. Oh, I skipped a bunch of them, huh?
Yeah.
Hit. I scrolled and then skipped. Okay, hit. Let me scroll up a little bit. There we go. Tent wall. And if you've ever been in a tent, then you know a tent is interesting because you feel safe in it, even though there's a very thin barrier between you and the outside world. If you've ever, kept the Feast of Tabernacles, and you know that. But once you're inside of it, doesn't it feel like, it just feels like home. Yeah. It feels secure, right? Mm-hmm. So, tent wall, and what it's supposed to do, the function of it is, it divides the outside from the inside, right? So, and the picture of it also deals with the separation of people, of worlds, of realms, however you want to put it. It's that very thin line between me and everything else on the other side, right? So in your body, right, your flesh is considered the tent. Why? Because it separates your spirit or your soul from the other side. Once your body leaves your tent, then it is one with, obviously, the world outside the world you experience in your flesh, right? So this body's like a tent, a temporary dwelling place, right? Okay, tet, basket, snake, surround. It's not on here, but on your thing it is. It's the idea of something that surrounds something. So different from a tent wall, which is here, but the surrounding or the containing means it holds contents. So a tent wall is a separation, but the tet is something that completely surrounds something, contains mud. And that tet is funny, it looks like one of those Native American baskets you see where they're like woven with like a reed or some kind of flax or something to hold it in. It kind of has that same similar picture. Yod or yad, arm and closed hand or arm and hand, and your arm in your hand, so mostly it's your right arm, right? And it's to work, use your arms to work, to throw, and to worship. Okay, so the idea of hands lifted up, your hand is able to give something, it's able to do something, it's able to work a work. So you see the arm and the actual hand together. Kaf, open palm. So now you don't just have an arm and a hand, but you have the palm. And if you look at the palm of your hand, and you look at the pictograph, it looks like that. Like if somebody was looking at this part of their hand, it looks just like that. On the second one, it almost looks like an arm with a hand coming up. And so it also looks like the lines on your hand too. Look at it, it's interesting. Yeah. Right? It means an open palm.
How come they got that design before the cough right there?
Which one?
Down like this one.
Which one?
Instead of it being like a backward C. See how they got that little,
The little like horn on the top of it?
Yeah.
you know?
I don't know. It could have just been how they found it and it was written because, you know, one of the other myths is that Hebrew has to be written absolutely perfect. And if you go through and you look at some of those things they found, like the ancient artifacts, you'll see that depending on the person's handwriting, you're gonna look at it a little bit harder. And so this idea like you can't touch it and it's this, there's a lot of things that keep roadblocks in front of you. You'll never write anything if you have to write it perfect. It makes it difficult. Like you tell a child, don't get past A until you write that A perfect. Well, they'll never learn the rest of their alphabet. But as you begin to write something and you begin to develop a relationship with it, you'll practice writing it better. And then that's why there were scribes. Like some of us just wouldn't have been scribes. Their handwriting is terrible. You're not a scribe. That's not your calling, right? Like, yeah. But so that could have been just how a person wrote it, or keeping it very similar to the late period Kaf, where it had that little horn thing, like you dropped one, you kept the other one. I'm not sure, but it means to open. So if you look at your palm, in order to see your palm, you can't have a fist. Your palm has to be open. So being open means to allow, and it means to tame. Why? Because the hand is used to tame. I don't know if you've ever, I know we do. Anybody that has kids has done this. So you're walking with your kid, and they go off, you grab them by the top of their head, turn their head. Your hand is like a control. If I can grab the head, I can control the whole body, right? So the palm of the hand, the hand is also seen as a way to tame. Also a form of discipline. If you get struck with the hand of something, it's going to tame that which it's striking. Right, it'll. So the idea of a palm or an open, it has the idea of blessing and also correction. So Eov or Job said, he's like, am I only supposed to take blessings from the hand again? And also the curses or the correction. Like, no, I can't ask for one thing out of the hand and then not want the other part of it. So that idea of Kaf has that within it. Lamed is a shepherd's staff. Okay, and it looks like it pretty much all the way through. Shepherds still carry rods, literally to this day. And so a shepherd's staff is interesting because my mind automatically goes to my high school basketball coach. He was a black belt, like a 10th degree black belt. And he would make us come to karate practice during our basketball training. I thought it was so dumb. Like I was like, I want to play basketball. I don't want to do karate. And he had this bamboo like stick. And when he would like correct with the stick, you would get hit with it. Like this is the thing. So if you're being lazy, your posture's not good, you're gonna get tapped with the stick. And what would it do? The tapping or the goading, if you will, it trains your mind to like, I'm gonna make sure this is right because I don't want that thing to happen. So the idea of a shepherd's staff and the idea of teaching is that it can be used to point or to point in a direction, which is the idea of to teach, to cast, or to show you where you should be going. Also can be used to hook a sheep that was going too far, tap them into line if they were getting outside of their ranks. And so it also can be used to yoke. So if you want a sheep close to you, yoke it. Like you would snatch it by its collar point. It literally fits perfectly around a sheep's collar and probably around a person's neck, which is funny. But you would bring it close to you, and you could almost like walk the sheep or the animal with this particular hook thing. If you look into ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, they had something that was a little bit smaller that they would use, and it's funny because when they raced dogs, what are those dogs you guys used to?
Greyhounds.
The greyhounds, right? They had that little thing, and you let them go in, and they take off running. It was the idea, the same thing. That's your food? Okay, take it in the kitchen. It means to bind, or to bring to something. It also means to in Hebrew, and it means to bind, okay? Mem, and you can see it with its little wavy, squiggly lines on the other side. I'll scroll up a little more. And it means water, chaos, mighty, or blood. And everybody who's been around water, right? One of the things, I used to be a lifeguard, probably won't believe me, but I did. And one of the things you learn is to respect water. You can't drink it all. So if you end up in it, you gotta know how to swim. And water has currents and has strength to it. And so some of the major water places in Israel are oceans. And then you have the Jordan, which would overflow its banks and it's rough. Like, I mean, we're seeing a fraction of probably the size it was during that time. It was a force to reckon with. And so water was seen as chaos. Why? Because it stirs up. When water comes, and it stirs up everything in the water if it has a force to it. Anything with a current, so I normally water with a heavy current is normally cloudy because it's stirring up all the things around. And so you have might and blood. Why? Because blood is strong, and so you would have seen the blood or the strength of the blood as something that was mighty. Noon, and it's seed. And so we looked last week at how it looks like a sprouting seed or male seed at a microscope, now that we can see now. And it means to continue, right? So when you put a seed in the ground, you're hoping to continue for it to bear after its own kind, to continue whatever plant that is. You don't plant an apple seed and expect to get an orange. You don't plant, you don't plant a human seed and expect somebody to bring you a basket of fruit. You're like, I want to see whatever I plant it come forth. Heir, so we use this term in agriculture, heirloom. So you have an heirloom tomato. What? It is bearing after that thing from a while ago that was great. So when you plant seeds, like we had watermelon, when we had a good one, we would throw the other ones out. When we got a really good one, you would keep those seeds. Because if you get that good one, that seed is supposed to bear after that really good watermelon. It's supposed to be a good one. So heirloom, heir. And then a son, same thing. He's an heir. He's supposed to be a identical replica, if you will, of the goodness of his father or the badness of his father. And we've seen that throughout Scripture a lot too, where you have sometimes, now it could go both ways, but sometimes you would have a really good king, right? And then his son would be good. But then sometimes you have a good king and his son would be terrible. And it would make you go like, what? Because it's not following this pattern of when a son was born, he was supposed to rule the house or lead the house like his father did. Right. Okay, sin, but it's actually a samic. And it's interesting because the samic and the sin, they were when you're looking up Hebrew words, and this will help you, just write it down and be used later. Sometimes when you're looking up a Hebrew word and you can't find the definition for it, it's because they use a samic instead of a shin or a sin. Because the sound of a samic and the sound of a sin would sometimes be interchangeable depending on who wrote it during what time period. So there are some words sometimes you're like, I cannot find the root of this word. They could have used a samic instead of a shin because it makes that sound both. So that's a samic, and it means a thorn. And it means to grab, like to grab your attention. I don't know. We live in the country where we have goat heads. And the other day, I don't know if I did step on a goat head the other day, but it was something that was pointy. And I stepped on it, and it immediately made me turn around and like look at what I just stepped on. Why? It literally grabs your attention. It arrests you.
I said,
She says, so he has things like Samic. Yes, it's supposed to be, and the idea of Samic is also the picture of a to turn your head. So when something pokes you or something grabs you, it's gonna draw your attention to it immediately.
Quickly.
Like really quick. So hate, because everybody hates a thorn in their flesh, right? Yes.
So far, all these definitions are similar to the ones we have in our book.
Yeah.
When we get to this one, it's different. Thorn is way different.
Right.
So we have a reason for that.
In the one you have on your sheet,
Oh,
in the regular bullet thing. This
Yeah.
would be
Add it.
huh?
Just tell them to add it, right?
You would
Thorn.
see none of these are, I would say, they're not exhaustive, if you will. So if you could see the relationship between, we have stomach, which is prop, support, right? Is that what we have? Hand on staff, right? So the idea of a prop or a support or hand on staff still fits those things. A hand on the staff, we go back up to the lamet, if you want to see the picture of a person with a hand on the staff, is one to protect, right? So the person with the lamet, the shepherd, is literally the one who is functioning as the summit. Now in a ancient Hebraic setting, the corral that we have today for our animals would have been made up of these huge thorn bushes. And they would take the thorn bushes and they would lay them around to bring the sheep in, right?
Correct.
And then the shepherd would lay at the door of the sheep pen, if you will. And so the idea of to grab or protect still fits that. The prop support, he's supporting or protecting something. If you look at the pictograph too, the Samic almost kind of resembles, if you will, a prop. Does that make sense? Like it has that, like you see how it has like those, it has the
Almost like a crutch.
yeah, almost like a crutch. Yeah, that's a good form for it. So the idea of hate here is the same. So we have, I'm trying to make sure we have Samic, hand on staff, support, prop is how we have it, right? So to hate something then is a separation from something. And so you see also here the interchangeableness of that sin and that Samic and that shin, because the Samic and the shin, both the same thing. The shin is like teeth, right? And it's the thing that's supposed to separate one thing from another. So it kind of, that's why those words I told you before, they're going to be sometimes used interchangeably in definition. There's Samic and shin, or sin is actually the sin form of shin. They could be interchanged sometimes. It definitely definition.
Why does the symbol vary so much with that one? I see like you have your early, your modern, and what was in between, but on that one,
It looks like that. What's that ancient? Not ancient. That Chinese symbol. It almost looks like that. No. Okay. You know what? That's a good question, because some of them, we're going to get a little bit further down, and some of them do look a lot differently. Now, what the Samic looks like in the modern script is a completely closed, circle symbol. But I'm going to say I could see why that would have probably been an issue when the iron was a circle.
almost closer to like a top.
It does look definitely more like a top.
Final mem.
Definitely looks like a het with the actual closed piece right there. Definitely. Now, if I said, does it look like a thorn? Yeah, it looks like, it would definitely look like a goat head in its final form. How would you say? Right, it does look like that too. So that is definitely something to look at, which is the evolution, if you will, from those two symbols that looked very similar to this symbol here. That's something to look at. So we'll revisit that one. All right, ayin, and we see it here also as ga, which is interesting because there's a symbol that doesn't exist on our chart, and it's a ga, and it actually became the ayin. They like merged in antiquity. For what reason? Because I guess they mean the same thing, and they're from two different Semitic branches. And it was like, well, you say ga, and I say ayin, but they're the same thing, so we're gonna go with ayin. So the ga became ayin. Yeah, liberties. And it literally means eye. So to watch, to know, shade, An idea of shade is to be over something and watching it. If you've ever been in a classroom and you've had a teacher step over you, they cast a shadow, right? It's somebody looking over you, right? Not necessarily just watching you, but intently watching you, to where they're like hovering over you, okay? Mouth. So pay is mouth, word, speak. And also here we have blow, to blow. And these definitions, I can automatically see them, definitely have a more Genesis or a bare sheet beginning, because one of the first things we see the action of the mouth is Yah speaking, and then we see it blow when he breathes to man. So we see mouth as more than just the idea of what comes out of your mouth, but also the blowing, right? So blow to scatter, so that those two go together, which is when you blow something, you scatter it. Edge, not sure why they chose edge. Anybody want to take a swing at that one? Oh, I can see that. Okay, the mouth of something.
Yeah,
That makes sense. Like
yeah,
the right.
the
So when you say the
corner,
mouth
corner.
of the mouth of the lake, or the mouth of, it
Right,
means
with
the
the
edge
edges,
of
the
it.
edges,
Go
like
to
the
the
back,
mouth of
right, go to
the,
the-
yeah. That, like I was like, so the edge, the corners of it, like
Would it be the corner?
yeah.
But because it's a circle, we say edge.
Right, the
Right,
edge
I
of
say,
it.
yeah.
So like if you say the
Oh, I
mouth
get
of the
it, I
river,
get it, I
it
get
means
it.
the beginning of it, or the edge,
I get
that portion of it. Okay, yeah, I had to think about that one. Zadi, so this idea of trail, you can automatically see that if you're looking at that idea. And then you have, we have man on side, desire, need, right? But also the journey. So what normally pushes a man or puts a man on a journey towards something is a desire to do it.
To
So
desire to do it.
righteousness is a journey, right?
Right.
You have to have a desire or a need for something beyond. And so you pursue this path of righteousness, trying to reach beyond to Elohim, right? So it has to do with journey, to chase, right? To pursue, to hunt, okay? And all of those, the desire and need, all tie into that. So when you hunt something, you only hunt for need. You only hunt to satisfy the hunger, right? People hunt for hate, obviously, because you can hunt man, but it's also to do something to stop something you have going on internally. So if I'm hunting after somebody and I'm upset with them, I'm hunting to deal with something I have going on inside. It creates the chase, right? There wasn't a lot of, immediately you would die for unreasonable death. Like any intentional death, you're dying for. Even unintentional death, you had to flee to the city of refuge. But in intentional death was just not heard of. So there's not going to be a lot of things that surround negatives of our culture.
So we're not allowed to overkill, like, kill 2 deers and take one home.
No, you weren't going to leave one out there. No, that's why we were talking about this the other day, and it's hard for people to come to grips with, because they put such a negative connotation on the word primitive, right, or ritualistic, right? And a lot of what we did was ritual, in the fact that, like, it fit what you see the natives do, where if I killed something, I thank that thing for its life. Because Yah said that if you kill an animal, your blood will be required of you as well if you killed senselessly, if you spill that animal's blood. And when you killed an animal for food, for hunt to eat, you had to take the blood and cover it with dirt, because it symbolized that this was not done for some rash, irrational reason, because when a person came across blood, immediately it's going to trigger something. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen animal blood or human blood, but they don't look different. If you see blood on something, perfect example, when Jacob's children take Joseph's blood on that, he didn't let me see if this is animal. He thought he was dead.
Right.
There was no difference to him between how it looked. And so if you saw blood spilled on the ground, it literally would trigger something in the person, like, who killed somebody? But if it was covered, it was like, oh, they killed an animal, they ate it, it was for this particular reason, it symbolized something. And so you could see, I don't know if it makes sense. Everything was practical, and it made sense, and it was done with a purpose. Okay, Kof, sun on horizon. Time condenses. I wouldn't say would be the best translation, but I guess if you see something out in the dense, I'm not gonna try to. But circle, something to come back around. But it is something beyond, right? It's something. It says heal or to be over, to go over. What's what do you have on your chart? On the cove?
So
Sun on horizon behind.
Sun around the
So obviously, the picture of it is a beautiful picture of that which is beyond. That which is beyond. So when you see words like Kodesh, right? It's separation, but it's like you need to be holy because I'm holy. I'm so far above where you are, right? And I know my limits and my heights are probably unknowable, but you need to separate yourself toward that. And it's a journey because it's something that it's going to take time to pursue it. It's not something that happens overnight. I'm holy in my mind, therefore I'm holy. Not exactly. Think holy so you're holy. No, it's a process. It's a process of time. And it's a life pursuit. If you ever try to go toward the horizon, as you go toward it, it seems like it gets almost further away. And so it's a never-ending journey, right?
So time also deals with the fact that as a person,
Okay, so time was also in the Hebrew mind, it was in relationship to the horizon. So as a person journeyed, and if they thought of what we consider to be eternity, it was to the horizon. And if it was what we would consider to be like everlasting, they would be, I don't have this word, Huldah, it'd be beyond the horizon. So now you're dealing with something like where you would get, I guess, English from everlasting to everlasting. So it's more than, it's greater, but the idea is still connected to the way they view time. And so remember the horizon, because that's going to come up later on. We'll talk about that, where you had a sunrise and you had a sunset. And so therefore, that became sort of like measurements for them. And we'll talk about that later. Just keep that in your mind.
Hey, Huldah.
Yes.
The sense of condense, if you're looking at something that's way out on the horizon, the difference between where it is on the horizon and where it is right next to you.
Yeah, that's good. That's right.
Brother Boring just pointed out that the idea of condense is when you're looking at something on the horizon, it's the perspective of how it looks in size. It looks smaller than when you get up on it. So you can see like a mountain out in the distance, and it looks like you just put your finger on it. Then you get up close to it, and it's like, wow, that thing is ginormous. So that's wonderful. What I also saw something when you were saying the idea of the other side or eternity, and the fact that eternity and time, the stuff you can see before you, is attainable. So if the idea of eternity was something that could be seen or was likened to the horizon, I may not understand everything about it, but it's something that I can see as attainable if I pursue it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And then idea of somebody going into eternity, if you've ever seen a person walk, if they keep walking, eventually they disappear.
It's like they disappear.
And like they're not going to come back. And when they come back, it's like they come back from over or beyond. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Resh, head of a man. You can see it clearly in the first one. This guy right here. Head of a man. So first, right? Top. So head. Ours is head person first, right? Or beginning. And we'll see that in our first word that we're going to write down in Genesis. I'm going to go through these last two because we know these. Shin, look at how they look. They look like teeth, like gnashers. 2 front teeth. I also share with you that the idea of the teeth, it can also be 2 danglers, El Shaddai, and sharp, press, eat, 2. So in our culture, we always look at the canines as the most important teeth. It was the 2 front teeth. If you normally see yourself bite something, because omnivores that we are, you are going to bite with your 2 front teeth. Nobody bites with their side teeth, unless you don't have 2 front teeth. But you bite down with these teeth right here. They are the ones that literally serrate or cut through things. And so, people have made arguments that we should eat like gorillas since they have, sharp fangs and they don't eat any.
Can you expand a little bit more on the 2 danglers?
Okay, so this idea that it could also be the idea of something that sustains. So, like your breast, like it could be something that sustains something, right? So you see the idea of two. You'll see words that have two. It'll normally have a shin and a dalet in it to tell you that it's specifically that. But the idea of shin is something that you eat, you consume. It's something that life comes from. Same similar picture. Okay, tav. Two cross sticks. So where you get your picture of your cross, if you will, in that first picture, right? Mark, sign, signal. It says monument, and we see mark, sign, covenant on our other thing. And so I heard a lot of arguments on, okay, should we or should we not use a cross then? Right? Because if the ancient pictograph picture is two cross sticks, then is there actually an issue with the picture of two cross sticks? Now, the two cross sticks were not our modern day cross picture, if you will. It's more like X marks the spot symbol than a modern day cross. It's to say this is this here. Now, what's interesting with Mashiach being hung on a tree is that you were immediately able to see that symbol. You weren't necessarily seeing a cross that we get in our westernized minds, but you were seeing this is a tree or something that would have had a mark on it for a monument, because we see it all the time. We mark on trees. Right. This tree belonged to Right. Well, he became that, if you will, mark with his body shape on that tree that symbolized the blood being shed for the tree or the family, because the family is a tree picture. It wasn't necessarily like, go get a piece of wood and put this old rugged cross on your chest. You'd be much better off with a menorah, because a menorah symbolized the tree. The tree that he was crucified on would have symbolized the branches or the tree or the people that he was dying for. Much better symbol than just two sticks crossed across each other, because that wasn't it wasn't meaning this particular thing. But yes, cross sticks marking the spot. So if you were scavenger hunting and you came across sticks on the ground, you're like, okay, I'm in the right spot. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is my mark. This is my sign. This is the signal that I'm in the right place. Here you go with this ga, which is the rope. And this is one that we don't have. You're not going to have on your chart. And it doesn't really show up much unless you have ancient script, really, really old script. And you see that it doesn't even have a modern, it didn't even progress through. If you find some old stuff, it will. It looks like a rope. And it means twisted, dark, or wicked. And it's one of those words that had a negative meaning. And it would have symbolized something that was either twisted, dark, wicked, witchcraft, those other things.
Yeah. So one of the things that you learn about this last letter is because Hebrew has a negative and positive charge on everything. One of the things that they would add to a word would be that to let you know sometimes that it was the dark side of it, the negative side of it. So you would see that added sometime, but it wasn't like Huldah said it wasn't popular enough, I guess, because after a while you can read the context of the verse and see it. So they was like, you know what, we don't really need this, and it kind of dropped after time.
Did it have a specific placement, like coming before or after, in the middle?
At the end.
The word?
At the
It's always at the end.
It's always at the end.
Yeah, because it would be like, this is this. Like how you have, if your ending would tell you what something,
That it was negative.
right, like that it was a negative or a positive.
I'll look it up.
Why are the modern symbols more complex, more abstract than the ancient symbols?
I think it's very indicative of a trend of our people. It is, I don't know why it's a human way to make things harder when they were already easier, because when they went into Babylon, if you ever look at, and I can actually draw you a picture. If you ever look at like, I've just Googled it. I'm gonna show you what Babylonian script will look like.
Yesterday, I was talking to Yazi, and he was showing us the olive, the ancient, with like the A on the side with the,
Yeah.
and he was showing us the Tav, and how they were basically the same minus a line. And so you could see
Yeah.
Like the two sticks
Yeah.
on the side, like
Mhm.
very similar. You could see the olive top and everything in between with just those two symbols. And a lot of the other symbols are much more complex. Like it makes sense for the resh to be ahead. You know, it makes sense for the shin to be in the ancient, the two teeth. But then,
Right.
like as we get more modernized, it does seem like it's more complex.
Because of the change.
Yeah.
It definitely, and I think it has to do with, I was trying to find a chart that would show it, but it has to do with like the blending of different scripts. Now, just a little historical background, Babylon, any world power became a melting pot for other cultures, languages, and so we've seen language kind of converge, if you will, over time. And so symbols began to change. Now there is a belief that the symbols that they picked still have a holy significance. You know, I'm not going to make that argument at all. But what I will say is they really did take what they were using at that time, and a lot of them did look similar because it was a Semitic language. But because Babylon became a world power and other people were using this language, they pretty much traded in, if you will, the concrete that we see on this chart for the symbols that were being used as a written language everywhere else. That makes sense. It doesn't really make sense. You can see it over here a little bit better, where like you have your Aleph, your bet, your modern day bet. They didn't change the meaning of them. Now I don't know why they went strictly away from pictographs, and it's gone so far that now if we try to go back, we'd have to rewrite every book that we have to even be able to read. But what you can see is that the end game, if you look at the middle symbol, symbolizes very closely to what we have in our Greek and in the
You're talking about the early script?
the middle, on this chart.
Oh.
So the middle script, if you start flipping those around, they look very close to what the Greeks and the Latins began using. So you can see that there was definitely a divergence between what the Babylonians or the late period were doing, and a lot of people still refer back to that middle period. So that is definitely the argument for using that particular script, is that it was probably the most well-known all the way around, or the longest used during that time period. You just see a lot of different people have used that. The Phoenicians, which were trading people, pretty much took that script, because that's a Phoenician script, the middle one, everywhere. It's not necessarily just Hebraic. So it was whoever was in power long enough to preserve the use of it for that period. So the Phoenicians, you'll see a lot of stuff in that middle script, and you'll see it in a lot of different areas because they were seafaring people. They had the coastland, and they took it. Obviously, you can see like the A, the middle A looks like the Greek A. That B looks like that B. That Gam, or the Gimel, looks like the Gamma. Like you can start seeing that there was a very close relationship, if you will, between those two people, where you can see a separation, if you will, between captivities, if you will. Where they were and what they were doing and who they were influenced by definitely changed how they wrote and did stuff. And that is one of the things I tell people. This Bible, when we look at our scripture, it has a beginning and an end. It has a goal. It has a thing in mind. But we know throughout the scripture that the Hebrew people were not on an island. And they weren't like now Yah preserved obviously the pictures and the meanings behind things, but the script, it didn't happen that way.
So would that, should that process to kind of go back to the paleo, the ancient, due to, you say that they were, the script changed according to who they were influenced by, which means that they were influenced by man,
Right.
and not Yah,
Well,
right?
from early to middle too.
But
Yeah.
as
So
long as they didn't change that.
they didn't change the meaning. So what I would say with that is this, and I'm gonna make it. Who would it benefit? Because we're not changing the meaning. The meanings have never changed. We're from Latin to that way to early to this way. We don't get a change in the meaning. So if we went back to a script that only a few people use, how would that benefit us trying to reach or reclaim? Like, for instance, how would we be able to read any of the stuff that we have today? Because we would have to go, all right, we need a whole new Bible in this script. We would need, and so my only guess for that would be if the Messiah comes and he says, we're going back to ancient script, well, I guess. But at this point, where would it stick us in a particular time where we don't know the language, where we wouldn't even be able to read or use anything? Like if we went back to this script and we only wrote like that, how would it benefit the kingdom, I guess, in a sense?
You can limit it to who you could talk to. Doesn't matter who you
Or who you would write to, or who you...
You couldn't even communicate.
I think everyone should know both. That wouldn't be my argument at all. But how would we achieve that? I guess if we retranslate it, who would we seek out to do it? And then when we stop all of our pursuit toward it, right? When we stop all our pursuit toward attaining the language until that was done, and then that one person had to teach all of these people, which would be to untranslate all the stuff we have. So you would, at best, have to learn modern script to then potentially work your way back toward Paleo.
Where does Aramaic fit in?
Aramaic is the Babylonian script. The script is exactly the same. The words, like where you'll start seeing bar. I was actually reading Daniel. Daniel was in Babylon, and he was saying bar, he bar enosh. And in scripture, when it says the Son of Man, in the older writings, it would say Ben Adam, or so they would say Bar Adam or Bar Enosh. Bar is the Aramaic form of son. So it would be the head, the head of the house would be the picture. Ben would be the continuation of the house. So you see how there would be some variation, but for the most part, the words are similar. It's just the script is a little different. You get some different words too and how they translated them, but it's not so far translated in a way that it doesn't still carry the same meaning as the Hebrew. Because remember, they're both Semitic languages. It's all dialect. Like people argue about the Canaanites. Like Canaanites spoke Hebrew. And so based upon their culture and their practices, they're gonna view things a little bit differently than we would, right? They would see Baal as something different than we would, and they would see Yahuwah as they call the Elohim, or the God of war, because he's always fighting us for some reason, and we can't ever appease him. Like you would see the perspective, so that's when you get the meaning of it changing. But remember, the Canaanites used the same script as the Hebrews, and they had two different mindsets on what things meant a lot of the times, based upon their worship structure. Okay, so I'm going to give you homework, because I know I'm not going to take up Maury's time for this part, because we started a little bit late. So we're going to go through, and next week, for sure, we're going to go through these words. And so you see, this is Genesis chapter 1, and it starts at verse 1. And what you're going to do is, if you have a Bible app, I have a bunch of them. The one I'm using currently is this Accordance. They have a paid portion. If you have to pay for it, just get the one you don't have to pay for. And you can also use, if you have an Android, My Sword, it's free. If you have a iPhone, use if you have an iPhone, use the Blue Letter Bible. I think that's the best one because it'll let you click on the words. So what your homework is going to be is you're going to go through, and you're going to go through Genesis 1 through, let's go through 1 through 10. Yeah, 1 through 10. And what you'll see is these words are going to repeat, so you're not going to keep writing down the same words, but go on your app, and if you have one, click on the word, and it's going to give you, the definition of it. I know it's kind of tiny, you can't really see it there, but I clicked on the word beginning, right? Because in the is not really a thing. In the is added because the translator added it. It would be like, it would just say in beginning. In Hebrew, it would say bear, sheep, like in the beginning. So in the, right? So click on your first major word, in the beginning, right there, and you'll see under it, you're gonna write down that word under it, And whatever script you choose, that's up to you. Because if at this point you can retranslate the whole thing into Paleo if you wanted to. If you start from here, it'll take a while, but it's possible. There are people who've done it. There are people who've taken the Paleo script, and there's like an interlinear online Bible where it has Paleo, Aramaic, phonetical writing, and it's really colorful, and for me it's difficult to read because there's like they do Greek, Paleo, modern script, and something else, and the transliteration, and they color code them each one. I think they did the whole Tanakh. So if you can Google like transliterated Paleo Bible or something, it'll show up. But click on those. Click on beginning. You're gonna write down the word. Don't worry about the vowel points right now because it might confuse you. So you write down Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav, and then write down what it means. Beginning, first, and then go to the next one. You're gonna go to the next one. You go to where it says God. You'll see Elohim. Write it down. Write what it means. Go to the next one. Created, bara. And you see how this is going to go. Now, you're not going to keep writing the same thing over and over again because it's going to say in your English, God a bunch of times. You're not going to write down all those gods. Once you wrote it down once, you don't have to write it down again.
Hallelujah.
Okay? You'll see Shamayim, Eretz. Earth is going to show up a bunch of times. You don't have to write it again. And the earth, you're not going to write down earth again. You're going to see without, form. You're going to write down all those new ones. Anytime you see something repeated, you don't have to write it down again. And then I'll give you a comprehensive list of the ones I got, and we can compare those next week. So say, let there be light. You see lights on Genesis 1:3 is there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're not going to write it 5 times. You're going to write the word for light 1 time. Does that make sense? And we'll go through those. And so next week when we go back, and we're going to read through it in Hebrew. So the other thing I'm going to have you do is that vowel point. If you can find one if you want. But I made it simple for you guys on video. I think it's 1 or 2, where I just gave you the sound. So all the E sound ones, there's some that have like different, like it'll be holam with a this and a that. I just want you to get the sound part right, okay? So you'll see different things, like it'll be like a shawa with a patak. Don't worry about that. You'll see it in the, you'll see like the little T under the word with 2 dots next to it. It sounds the same. And I think I showed you that in the second video. Don't worry about that. A, E, A, O, U. That's all I need you to know. Okay? So if you can make those sounds, we'll be good next week. I'm going to actually print out, and for the people online, I'll print out an easier version. We're going to go through 4 verses. So we'll try to make it through 10, but I'm going to say 4 for sure. We'll make it through 4 verses of Genesis, and we're going to read through them. And you guys are going to give me the definitions. So you should have them. I'm not giving definitions next week. I'm just going to read with you.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yes.
you said we look out the words,
And then just write what they mean.
write what they mean in Hebrew, right?
Uh-huh.
And
And then what they mean in Hebrew, what they mean in English.
okay.
And you can even, if it makes it easier for you, write it out phonetically how it sounds. So if it's red sheet, and you see like, oh, okay, if it's RESHEE, because I know in English I say EET. Write it out how it's easier for you to remember it, because how it's written in English doesn't matter. That's just to help you. That's not necessarily. Yeah, see, look at you over there. Look. Just like that. Just like that. Okay. Any questions? I had a couple other things. And next week we won't have to go through the chart again, but I felt like that was important because we're going to be looking at those letters again. And knowing what they mean is going to help with the definition. We're also going to look at that video, that book I showed you at the beginning, this beginning Hebrew. If you don't have one of these, Time to Read Hebrew, and you want to learn like a child, grab it. It's worth the $10 or whatever, and it'll really help. And the kids can use it too, because Jade uses this. Amazon. Amazon. Yeah.
Who is that by?
It's by Orna, O-R-N-A, Ariel, Lynchner, L-N-C-H-N-E-R.
And it's called Time to Read.
Time to Read Hebrew, Volume 1. There's a Volume 2. Volume 1 will be good. And then during the week, I think I'm gonna go through this one for people who wanna just like take a crack at reading and kind of skip over the preliminaries. It's the first Hebrew reader. Now, it's better if you go through the first Hebrew primer first, but you don't have to if you want a little bit of a challenge. And what it does is it's going to give you all of your definitions that are used in the text on the left-hand page. So it'll say like, this is the verb, this is the root, this is the pattern, this is the definition, and so you can read through and get comfortable reading. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not even going to spring this on anybody, tell you ahead of time. The goal is this, and nobody can opt out, because I told you last week that opting out, it doesn't exist in the Hebrew. You're either in or you're out. So there's no opting out. The goal is we're going to take these passages, especially the ones for us that are in here learning, Genesis 1:1. You're going to get up on Shabbat and read it in Hebrew. That's the only way we're going to get better at reading out loud. Like, I need to read out loud. I'm terrible at reading out loud. I'd be like, oh, this is a struggle, right? But if we say we'll take a book, we're going to start with a psalm. I have a psalm already in mind, a short psalm, and each person is responsible for a verse of the psalm. And you're going to get up, and you're going to read your verse. So the good part is you'll have all week. I'm going to tell you a month in advance. Okay. So everybody should know everybody's part, right? You'll have all week before your week comes to practice your line. Hopefully you'll be able to read the person before you's line and the person before you's line and then your line. So you should be practicing reading it. Because if somebody gave you a paragraph to read and you had a month to read over it and you had to read it in front of somebody, you're like, oh no. No. Since you're gonna make me say oh. But it's up to you. You can write it out phonetically underneath what you're writing. So you can do all the cheat. It's not a test. You can write it out how you hear it or how you've got it underneath your word. But I think it's a good practice to get us used to hearing these words, to get us up to be on guard for when you're going to be up to read. It's a good practice to get people used to hearing Hebrew in the congregation. Because before we used to like recite different things, and I think we have to get back to that because the goal is to shift to where, like I've been to, and I'm sure at Har Adonai you guys have this, where maybe, it's like maybe, but I've been to Messianic fellowships where they get up and people read, and I mean some people like it's not about how well you read it. Some people get up and it takes them like 20 or 30 minutes to read like 4 verses. And you know, the Moria, the rabbi just stands there and they help them through it. But at the same time, what I saw when I went was the effort and what that did for the people. Then you look forward to your opportunity to read in front of the congregation, and you're reading the language and you're reading it in its word, and it creates a whole different vibe and culture, especially when people come here and they visit and they're like, wow, these people are like actually like, and you encourage one another, and you know how hard it is to get up there and speak and read. So then you start to really, really have a reverence for the word, and it'll really help people to begin to train themselves to use Yah's name and different things. If you have to like consciously be mulling over this stuff on a consistent basis as a group, as a group. So I know that we talked about this. He was like, okay. So we're gonna. It's crazy. Yeah, Ozzy would be on my side right now.
That sounds good.
So it's
I'll read Genesis.
in paleo.
Paleo. Like work our way
We'll
up.
write it up. He'll have to write his out and put it up on there. Yeah. So that is the end. That is the not the end game, but that is where we're going with this. We're going to progress through this together, because if just 10 people begin to do it, then like I said at the beginning, the way that we learn like a child is for the more mature child. If you have 2 children, they mimic the ones who are doing more. It's like, okay,
That's right.
that kid can walk. I'm over here crawling, and you see like kids start walking at 7 and 8 months when they have a sibling. It's just what happens. So if you get a core group that are pushing, then it provokes the other people. Yeah, I was like, I know how to provoke.
Yes.
I'm gonna provoke you with something that you're like, I can do that. So that's how kids learn to do it. I can do that. I can do that, and they begin to do it. So some of us have to commit to doing it.
Is it okay? I'll be a second child now.
Yes, you can be a second child.
I'm gonna need it. I'm way far behind. I've been studying.
But it's not behind. It's right on time. Whenever you learn is when you learn. You have and I can stop my camera, but if you, the lady, and I always pick somebody that probably nobody knows, Ava DuVernay, she is the one who did 13th, Selma, and The Wrinkle in Time. Her and the guy that did Black Panther were the two most grossing, they grossed so much money the year that they did those two films. She did not pick up a camera until she was 35 years old, or 30 years old, or something like that. She had never done filming ever. So I think it just has to do with how bad you want to do it. What's your vision? What's your end game? What's your goal? And then you go after it. Like, I think our minds, if Hebraically, they didn't understand that. If you could have never told Moses, like, dude, you're old. Like, I can whoop you, though. Nobody out here can whoop me, though. Right? That idea of, like, getting to a point where you can no longer, or where it's more difficult, is all mental. The body ages, but the soul, the mind, it doesn't. You keep your mind sharp. Like, that's what our culture tells us to do. So Hebrew keeps your mind sharp because it's not something you're going to master. Hebrew will master you. You will never master it. It's a lifelong pursuit. So when you sign up for it, be in it for the long haul. Like, you're going to always learn new things. It's living. Every time you open up your scripture, especially once you have the Hebrew, you feel like you're swimming in like 20 feet of water all of a sudden. Like, I thought I was swimming 3 feet. Ooh, but now this is ocean. Like, and it grows and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So you're putting yourself in a position to really be able to see and speak to Yah in a completely different way. And believe me, just like we marvel over our children when they get to kindergarten and they sing those little songs, because I was just crying my little eyeballs out when Jade was singing her little songs in her little kindergarten graduation. Why? Because, wow, look at you. And then to a normal person, like, she's not doing anything. She's singing 3 little ducks went out to play. And I'm just like, oh, I remember when you were. I think Yah marvels over us the same way when we set our minds and we stand before him in his greatness and try to, like, speak and learn this language. And he's like, that is so cute. I mean, cute, I wouldn't say cute because guys don't say cute, but you know what I mean? He's like, wow, how does that touch his heart, and how much more then does he pour in to meet you halfway? You have to start on the journey to be met with the things you need to continue on the journey. Because I used to pray for y'all to just drop it in my head like the Matrix. It doesn't work. I'm like, can I get the download? Can you just, like, put that thing in the back and, like, jujitsu? No, it doesn't work. So it's gonna take some effort, but the more we try and the more we have the support of everybody around us, we're all learning. Believe me, if I start reading right now, you'd be like, wow, she reads like a first grader. It's just what it is, right? And then we have other people to read with, so we're gonna make it. We're gonna get there.
Thank you.
To sacrifice, it's time you know the